Welcome to my secondary channel, where I love discussing writing and also reviewing books. And to that end, I want to review Z is for Zachariah. No, Z for Zachariah. A short story, well, a short book, I guess a novella, I guess you'd call it, that was written in the 70s, I believe. And it's set in a post apocalyptic world. And it's got the main character, Anne Burden. And being a post apocalyptic story, it's all about her survival. And so, what I'm going to do is similar to what I'll be doing for my other reviews. I'll have a spoiler free section and then a spoiler section later on. So, to start off the spoiler free review, this is told in first person and there's only ever one point of view in the story. It doesn't switch from first person to third person like it does in other stories that I've read. So it stays that way. It's also relatively short. It's 250 pages or something like that. And so it's fairly brisk and it doesn't linger too long on particular scenes. And it's all set in the one valley in the story. There is also a good mixture of past tense and present tense, and those two are intermixed to create a lot of tension in the story. So, for example, we'll have sort of a present or maybe even a future tense sentence or a few sentences, sort of explaining what's going to happen, sort of whetting the appetite for the upcoming scene, and then it goes back to the present. But it does mostly keep to past tense and then stays in the present and then occasionally jumps into the future just to make you anticipate what's going to happen in the future and sort of help you imagine or try to imagine how the events that are currently happening connect to this new crazy future. So in that sense, there's quite a few twists and turns, and every single one of them paid off. So before continuing, I'll read the back blurb, which says, Anne Burden is 16 years old and completely alone. The world as she once knew it is gone, ravaged by a nuclear war that has taken everyone from her. For the past year, she has lived in a remote valley with no evidence of any other survivors. But the smoke from a distant campfire shatters Anne's solitude. Someone else is still alive and making his way toward the valley. Who is this man? What does he want? Can he be trusted? Both excited and terrified, Anne soon realizes there may be worse things than being the last person on Earth. And so, as this back blurb implies, there are not many characters, and there's a hell of a lot of inner monologue and inner dialogue. And even though there's a lot of action in the story, there's also a lot of reflection, which I guess goes part and parcel with being a post apocalyptic story. Also, the story gives fairly intricate details of things that are needed to survive, like, farming, planting, milking cows and that sort of stuff, which adds a lot of flavor to the story. The one thing that you'll have to understand before buying this book, before choosing whether or not you're going to buy it, is that it's fairly straightforward in the sense it doesn't get bogged down with sort of emotional stuff. It's a very practical story and there's no melodrama. And so if that's something you want in your story, for example, maybe think of the show something like Money Heist. That's essentially a melodrama. This story is not like that. It's much more practical, much more straightforward. And I guess in some senses, it is more realistic because even when terrible things happen to us, we always, or almost always, we find a way to adjust. And this is what the characters are doing in this book. And so, in that sense, it's a fairly brisk story. And once again, like I said, it is fairly small. And so it can't get bogged down too much. However, it also means that character motivations are sometimes left in the dark and they're left open to interpretation. Your mileage on this will vary. And finally, to finish the spoiler free review, because it was written in the 70s, it includes tech from the 70s. So there's no particular period that the story is set in. However, it doesn't talk about characters missing the internet or computers or something like that. No, obviously it didn't exist when the author wrote this. But to summarize, this is absolutely amazing. If in a post-apocalyptic story with a first-person mode that goes fairly briskly is a story for you, you absolutely have to get this. It's 10 out of 10. But let's go into the spoiler review. So to start off with, the anticipation for when meeting the other character, whom she calls Mr. Loomis, is absolutely amazing. You see it from her point of view. She's living mostly in a cave. She's got all her stuff in there. and she can see his campfire getting closer and closer. And then eventually he comes into her valley. And exactly like the back blurb implies, she's intrigued, but she's also terrified. And so she's watching him as he's going around the valley, as he's checking certain places before he eventually discovers her house. And then you can almost imagine him thinking, wait a minute, this looks a bit too neat. There's almost certainly someone nearby. However, before there can be a proper introduction to the character, to Mr. Loomis, as she calls him, he actually goes for a swim. However, he goes for a swim in the wrong river. And it turns out there's sort of two rivers, and one river is all good, the other river is most definitely not. And it's all lifeless. And unfortunately, yeah, he goes for a swim there, and it turns out that's an irradiated river. He also turns up in a suit, which turns out to basically be a hazmat suit, but in the story it's described as plastic, but that can reflect radiation. So he's completely safe from radiation, and that's in fact how we made it alive, safe and sound, to her valley, which is basically surrounded by radiation. And so, as it turns out, because she's in a valley, she was protected from the fallout. But yeah, he obviously takes off the suit. He wants to go for a bath. And then, yeah, he goes into this river. She then introduces herself to him. And then he starts becoming sick. Really, really, really sick. And so, first, maybe third or something like that chunk of the book is devoted to essentially all the care that's needed to keep him alive. And, it's getting worse and worse. And this is sort of where you can feel the first bit of tension, the first bit of longing, the aching for the character to just get good. As you're reading, you're like, oh man, you're just praying that he gets better because, she's on her own. She's 16. This man turns out to be in his 30s, maybe early 30s. And, he could really help her survive and maybe even thrive in the valley. But he's getting sicker and, she's checking his temperature. It's 105 degrees. It must be Fahrenheit. Otherwise, if it was in Celsius, you'd be dead. I think it starts at like 102, 103 or something. But then, yeah, it goes up to 105 and then goes up to 106. And I think that's the highest on the thermometer. And, you can almost feel like he's going to die. You can feel like sort of the sense of drama and dread coming in. But then he actually gets better. And it's going about her daily routine as she's making breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like I was saying in the spoiler-free part, she has to milk the cow, tend to the chickens. She's also plowing. He also helps her start up the tractor again to make the plowing and the like easier. But then as soon as he's better, that's when he starts to take control. And, he's trying to control her movements. And, he's really becoming more forceful. And initially, it seems like, he's becoming really forceful because he's saying, oh, we really need to prepare for the future. And he's not really giving her any say in it. He's saying, oh, basically, we need to do this, 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 and this. This is all the things you need to do right now. As soon as I'm better, I'm going to be helping with this, this, and this. And initially, I thought, oh, this is just a very practical man who, hasn't spoken to anyone for like a year. And he doesn't really know how to relate to people. Or maybe even in his past life, he didn't really know how to relate to people. And so that's now how it's coming out right now. However, that's not really the case. And there's an interesting, or I guess weird moment, I didn't quite know how to read it, whereby she's talking to him and she's trying to get more information from him. And eventually she asks, is he married? Or was he married? And he gets really intense about that. And then there's a bit of inner monologue that she has. And then he gets really, really intense. He's like, why did you ask that? And he grabs her hand quite forcefully. And then, she slaps him and he eventually lets go. But you can tell that both of them are a little bit shaken by this, obviously, mostly her. And then, she's sort of standing back from him, given this reaction. And I couldn't help but wonder, why? And this is one of the things that I was saying in the previous section is that character motivations are sort of left open to interpretation. Why was he so hung up on just that question? She asked him other questions, and he didn't seem to indicate that he, really cared about the amount of questions. It's just that he really got hung up on this particular question. And so, if his wife or girlfriend or what have you had passed away, there are other ways to react to that, or there are other ways to talk about that. But it also then gets worse. So there's a bit more standing off-ish. and they're both in the house. And she eventually goes to sleep at one point and has the dog beside her. And actually, then he comes in at one point and essentially, yeah, tries to rape her. And she escapes, and she escapes to her cave. But she never told him about the cave. So now he has the house and she has the cave. And there's no contact for a little while. I can't remember exactly how long, but then she reestablishes contact. But he controls the house and everything, and she's bringing him food and water. But yeah, she's going to live in her cave. However, he's trying to track her, and more specifically, he's trying to do that with the dog because that's what the dog does. It's essentially a tracker dog, I guess. I don't know the lack of a better term, but it can track scents. And so there's this period whereby he's using the tractor and the dog on the leash to then track her to try to find out where she's hiding. And basically, you understand that he's trying to control her. And in fact, there's a point where she goes back and she wants to sort of make amends with him or sort of learn how to live together in the valley. And she goes to the house and she's standing still and he shoots at her, but he shoots her foot. And it's not necessary. I don't think it was necessarily a bullet, but it was something that obviously hurt a lot. And she ran away. And he basically wanted her to come back so he could really control her. And this is the point of the story where, once again, motivations are not stated or really expanded upon or given much room to breathe. And you can sort of imagine that, oh, because of the post apocalypse, this is the way he is now. Or, the journey, the lonely journey that he took from further up north, that he took down to the valley, it made him crazy or it turned him to a monster or what have you. But my interpretation, my reading of this is that basically he was always an asshole and that the post apocalypse basically allowed him to live like he always wanted to. And so it's like the same story with like drunk people. When drunk people they do something crazy or they're really annoying or obnoxious or what have you. It's not that being drunk made them that way. It's just that they were always like that, and being drunk then removed any inhibitions they had, removed any sort of walls or screens or what have you, and they became essentially who they truly are. And so the same thing with this story, and especially because in this story, the way he actually got the suit was that it's apparently one of a kind in the world, essentially the first hazmat suit. And there's two people left. And not that he doesn't tell her directly, but when he had the fever, the massive, massive fever from the radiation poisoning, he was talking in his dreams or during his fever. And basically, she pieced together that he was with someone else and they were stuck in an underground shelter, like a scientific laboratory that was secret and hidden with only one suit. And the person wanted to leave with a suit. But Mr. Loomis, he didn't want the other person to leave with a suit because he didn't know if the person with the suit would come back, his friend at the time. And so he actually shot him to prevent him from leaving. And in fact, there were 3 marks through the suit where because the other guy was wearing it, and then he shot him. And then that's why, well, one of the reasons why he decided to leave at that point, because he was completely on his own in this bunker. And so basically, the post-apocalypse let him essentially live out the life he was always going to leave. So that's what she discovered. And she, things are quite tense after, he shot her. And being young and naive, she doesn't quite know how to sort of process this. And then eventually, especially as you're reading all this, you're like, oh man, don't go back to him, don't go back to him. Especially when she was describing going back to the house and, slowly moving in front of the house because she's such a slow, easy target. And the house is, it's a freestanding house and there's no obstructions at the front. And so, yeah, she's back in her cave and the guy's getting closer. Oh, and also he's using the dog to track her. And eventually you're sort of getting that really creepy free feeling, the dread that she's going to have to kill the dog because eventually the dog is going to discover where she's hiding. But as it turns out, they discover the cave anyway, and she remains hidden, and he burns everything she had in the cave, and that is sort of when she makes a decision, or she sort of it was on her mind to actually steal the suit, steal his supplies, and leave, and go elsewhere. However, when he burnt everything in her cave, that's when it sort of solidified, and she's going to steal the suit. It's absolute resolute now. It's going to happen. And but also by this point, he's mostly recovered from having radiation poisoning. So then she concocts a plan to write him a note and to say, oh, we're going to make amends. We're going to learn how to live together, blah, blah, blah. Meet down at some particular point. But that's a ruse. So yeah, she writes a note, leaves it for him. He believes it. He goes down to that point and she just takes the suit and leaves. And I was thinking, as she's doing this, I was like, is she going to say, goodbye, or is she going to confront him one final time? It'd be a bit weird, even though it's like, the safest thing to do. And in real life, you just leave. You definitely wouldn't try to hang around or, come back to talk to the character. But, being a story, there has to be some sort of resolution between the two. So yeah, as I was reading this, I was like, oh, thank God she's safe. And she successfully steals it and stashes the cart and the suit. Well, no, she wears the suit and takes the cart and supplies and stashes it somewhere and then comes back. And at this point, you're like, oh man, he's going to be unhinged. And they both have guns. And she sees him and says, drop your gun. And, he's aiming it at her and saying, you're stealing my suit. And then she says, yes, I'm going to steal it and you can't stop me. The only way you're going to do it is if you shoot me. But then she also mentions you're going to have to shoot me like you did your former friend back in that secret laboratory. That's the only way you're getting this suit back. And you can sort of see this sort of stuns him. He doesn't really know how to process this. He didn't know that she knew because, he didn't directly tell her. It was only during the fever dreams. And so he's on the back foot at this point. And she really presses it and says, I'm taking this suit. And I'm going to look for other people. You're going to be all alone here, but you have the valley. If I find other people, I'm going to tell them where you are. So if there are other people around, you won't necessarily remain alone, but that's it, we're done. You're not coming with me, and I'm going out on my own. I guess, he couldn't really go with her anyway. There's only one suit, and there's radiation everywhere. Oh, and also the final bit that she tells him is that, like in the story, she says, oh, I felt petty when I said this, but I was like, yeah, damn right. She tells him, you didn't even thank me, that I took care of you for all those weeks that he was sick. And I was like, yeah, damn right. He didn't thank her. What a prick. But yeah, her being quite young and a little bit more naive, sort of felt that was petty rather than almost like a mic drop moment. But yeah, the final bit of the story is her sort of, escaping, but it's almost written in like present tense. It's like, I don't know where I am. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I'm going to keep going towards towns and I'm going to look for survivors. And basically, I'm content. And that is the story. Z for Zachariah. Essentially, Z for Zachariah comes from, I think it's from a Bible verse or story she read. And it's essentially the last man. Potentially, Mr. Loomis could be the last man. So thank you for watching my video. Like I was saying, you absolutely have to go out and buy this book. It's quite cheap. If it sounds anything remotely like it might be something you might like. And even if you're quite unsure, it's not too bad because, like I said, it's like just over 240 pages. And so even if, some of it might sound a little bit off to you or you're not 100% sold, I think by reading from the first page, you'll be hooked and you won't be able to put it down. I'm a slow reader, but I read this in about 2 weeks. Normally, this kind of book would take me like a month or more to read. But as I was saying, thank you for watching. Like I was saying, this is my secondary channel. Check out my primary channel, which is all about economics. And so that's Petar Economics, Petar Economics. And it's mostly about the macroeconomy. But otherwise, if you wouldn't mind sharing these videos, subscribing, rating, and all that, that would help my channel, help me grow. And I look forward to seeing you in more of my writing videos. Thank you.